From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
Hello, and thanks for choosing to invest the following 3,600 seconds of your life with us, here in Linz or from home, for this panel on intercitizenships and the Internet for Solidarity and Care, presented by the Billion Seconds Institute. Before starting, I would like to thank Eliza, Felipe, and Pia, who's joining us from Madrid, for this shared space time, to Michelle and Chris, from Branch Magazine for inviting us to collaborate in this fascinating symposium, and to Ruth and the whole Ars Electronica Festival team that have been working really hard to make all of this possible. So I am Andrés Colmenares. I am the co-director of IAM, a creative research lab that is based in Barcelona, that I founded in 2015 with my partner, with my life partner, Lucy Black Swan, to help citizens and organizations make more responsible decisions by using futures as tools, and in this way anticipate and collectively better understand the socio-ecological impacts of the digital economy. We do that through commission projects, partnerships, and collective learning initiatives as the Billion Seconds Institute. So today I will moderate this panel discussion about how finding meanings for a new word, intercitizenships, can help us shape better worlds and reimagine the internet, in plural, to address a planetary crisis of imagination. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest panelists today, Eliza Anyangwe, Felipe Castelblanco, and Pia Mancini. So let's start this session with a round of introductions. So welcome, Eliza.
Hey, hi everyone. So I guess I'm just going to introduce myself very briefly, because with the internet you can find out all my information online. But what is useful to say? I am a Cameroonian based in Amsterdam. I currently work for CNN as the editor of a gender reporting project for CNN called As Equals, and I guess I'm here because I'm really interested in how we use digital space to inform ourselves, to share what we know, but also to, upend current systems. What is the role of media in doing that? So that's why I'm here.
Hello, my name is Felipe Castelblanco. Likewise, you can find a lot about me online. I should say I am an artist, a filmmaker, and a researcher. I am also the initiator of a project called the Parasite School, which you can find the name and lots online. And I have been working for several years across media. I say I'm an artist that I make things, but also make things happen. And I'm really invested in these processes of collaboration with numerous communities, most recently in the Colombian Pan-Amazon region, which is the southeast of Colombia. So I'm really happy, and thank you for having me here. I hope we can contribute to this lovely conversation.
Thanks, Felipe. And hi, Pia. You're on mute?
Isn't that the most 2020 statement of all? You were on mute.
I know.
Yeah, okay.
Is that better?
Yes.
I'm not muted. Yeah, can you hear me now? Yes, okay, great. So hi everyone, I'm Pia Mancini from a different corner of the pale blue dot today. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. So about me, I was born in Argentina and I'm currently living in Madrid. I've always worked in the intersection of technology and politics. I am co-founded and part of a foundation called the Democracy Earth Foundation that, as you can imagine, is trying to think democracy for the whole earth, for a global democracy and what that would look like. And then I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Open Collective, a platform that helps communities have economic power. So really helps communities and impact initiatives to get funding around the world. So that's me. I'm the mother of a 6-year-old called Roma. And yeah, hopefully she's not going to barge in during this. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Thanks, Pia, Felipe, Eliza. It's a dream come true that we are here. I'm very, very pleased to share this with you. So, well, as an introduction to the topics that we will address in this panel, I would like to tell you a story. So, it's a short story, but it's about 1 billion seconds. And how it started, and where the ideas for intercitizenships are coming from. So it all started with a hypothetical question that was part of the Everything Manifesto, which was a collection of thought experiments and a proposal to change how the digital economy is changing everything, and by everything we refer to planet Earth. It was published in late 2019 around a hypothetical question. What if we imagine 1 billion in terms of time, life, attention, instead of understanding it only in terms of money? So the long-term and large-scale ways of thinking that we need to think around 1 billion seconds, which is more or less 32 years, is our way to address the existential crisis of imagination, and in particular, the crisis of sociological imaginations, which is the ability to see the context which shapes our individual decisions, as well as the decisions made by others. This is an ability that is under threat. So we are using hypothetical questions as tools to contribute to the exponential growth of a superpower. A common sense of responsibility, solidarity, and collective action, to face, unfortunately, an uncomfortable truth, which is that the environmental emergency is not only about extreme weather events, it is also a consequence of the social injustice derived from extractivism, and is a major threat to the survival of humankind in the next few decades. So today the climate conversation is centered on carbon emissions, and it's a step in a good direction, but as far as we can zoom out and become aware that one of the main drivers of the emergency is a very human-centered thing, selfish greed. This selfish greed is part of the culture of individualism that is driven by the extractive capitalism, which is leading to unimaginable wealth concentration, and also to toxic lifestyles that have been exponentially growing in recent years inside and around the digital economy. So as we were working on our research agenda for the 2020s, we decided to dedicate the next billion seconds of our lives to address this crisis of imagination. Because we, humanity, we cannot lose our capacity to collectively imagine how our digitally driven everyday lives can change from moving fast and breaking things to moving slow and repairing things. So after a very challenging 2020, with a lot of reflection, this March we launched a Kickstarter campaign, and thanks to the support of more than 100 founding members, we were able to start the Billion Seconds Institute, which is a lifelong learning initiative to organize a network of specialists, of advisors, and communities of practice to reimagine the ways that we understand and shape the mental, the social, and environmental impacts of the digital economy. The direction of this reimagination journey is defined by a long-term purpose, which is to contribute to a transition from the individualism of the user-centric digital economy to the interdependence of digital ecosystems driven by, hopefully, billions of responsible citizens of planet Earth. So in shorter words, our purpose is to collectively learn how to become intercitizens. This is a new word that we're trying to shape, intercitizenships. Because words contain shareable thoughts and shared meanings. These are bits and pieces, branches to our imaginations that, by coming together in stories about possible worlds, or futures as many of us like to call it these days, these stories that we tell each other, they can end up influencing all kinds of decision-making, a practice that many call design, by the way, at different temporal, spatial, and emotional scales, shaping behavior resulting in rebuilding worlds, which are nothing else but the collective existence of humans and non-humans. So intercitizenships is a plural first world. It's about becoming, not being. And this is why we don't want to have a singular definition for it. We want to present it as a thinking tool to co-create meanings in different contexts and for different cultures. So as a first step, we started organizing a small group of specialists and mentors that is called the Intercitizen Council to help us in this process to co-create a proposal for a declaration for intercitizenships that we expect to publish on Earth Day of next year, April 2022. And Eliza, Felipe, Pia, and Michelle, together with a couple dozen more friends, are starting this process. And actually here at this very exact time, we are doing the first public conversation about intercitizenships. So let's start with words and meanings. So the very basic question that I have for you, let's start with Eliza. For each of you, you have like more or less 1 minute to answer this question. What is the internet? What is the personal meaning that each of you have of the internet?
In a minute. Shit.
Or two.
Can I just say first, that was a great story. You should tell more stories. So I was thinking about this, my personal definition of the internet is as someone who remembers dialing in, and having a phone line and having to connect to the internet. The internet is something that has always existed outside of me and very much a space of privilege that you need to be able to access, that you need tools to be able to access. And so it has never felt to me, and I think you maybe touched on this in your story, that it is something that you can belong to. And so it has always been really surprising to connect with people there, for me to access this world and then be able to access the people there in real life. For there to be some sort of symbiosis has been mind-bending, like that the internet has shaped my life because of the information and the people I have been able to interact with, and yet understanding that it is not something I can take for granted at all. And you feel this even more so now, right, the minute your connectivity gets a little bit shaky, that you feel a sense of entitlement to the sort of abundance of that space, but it is not one that you automatically have or should take for granted. So I have this kind of, I'm glad that you made me think about it, because there's a sense of a privileged access to something that feels fundamental but still very much isn't.
Felipe. Well, I think the internet, I like to look at it in a temporal way, I think it's a manifestation or an embodiment of a biological predisposition in a way that we have towards connection. And not just humans, but all kinds of species and even viruses, to come close, to exchange. So I do see the internet as maybe our generations that's what we have. There has been something before, press, call it. There will be something in the future that it has the same, by design, the same functionality, which is a connector. So in this case, like, we are prone or biased towards this human connection, and the internet is that space where we do it at the moment, where that is possible. It happens with bits and cables and wires and materials. But to me, it reveals just simply that predisposition.
Interesting. Pia, what is the internet?
So for me, I guess the internet is a catalyst. It's the catalyst of a generation that it's not an age generation, right? It's like a moment before or after the internet kind of generation. And I think it's a generation, it's a catalyst to a new way of collaborating, of understanding each other. It's a catalyst of citizens who are able to represent themselves. It's a catalyst for multiple different forms of identity and the ability to contribute more or less to different groups. And so I see, ultimately, I think for me, the internet is, it's a jurisdiction almost. It's a layer on top of which we can construct a different way of organizing ourselves.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about it.
If I will play the role of Roma, your daughter. What is
It's a
the
tough
internet,
one.
Mom? What can you tell someone born in this century, especially a kid?
What can I tell them about the internet?
Well, if I was Roma asking, like, I don't want to do a bad imitation of your daughter, but
Oh, I see.
What is the internet, Mama?
It's very funny because for her, the internet is already so embedded. Like, I think it's a little bit what Eliza was mentioning, right? It's just such a part of every day that I don't think she questions what it is. It's funny, she goes, like, for example, Mom, can we get this on the internet? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Or can we do, and the internet is like part of her, I don't know, her daily way of connecting to the world. And I think that has implications in how she's gonna perceive herself. Roma is an interesting one as well, because her birth was registered in the blockchain in 2015 when she was born. We did a proof of existence, like little experiment with Santi, with my husband, and we registered her birth on the blockchain. And the whole idea, and I think it's very related to how I perceive the internet, so that's why I bring it up. The whole idea was to say, like, there's a network that has validated that this girl was born in San Francisco on this day in 2015. And it's a network that is validating that before the state of California can validate that. And that for us is so powerful, and it absolutely turns upside down the way we perceive ourselves and the way we perceive our identity and what is giving us that identity. Sorry, I digressed.
Thank you, Pia. Well, talking about implications, the next question for all of you is from your different backgrounds, because it's from media, from artistic research, from a mix of activism and decentralization. What do you consider now, being it's September 2021, what are the top 3 issues or challenges that you care about the most, the ones that you consider need to be at the top of all the agendas when it comes to the current relationship status between humanity, this big we that all of us humans belong to, and the digital technologies, but not only the ones that we can touch, but the systems, the invisible ones, that ultimately, as Pia was saying, end up shaping our idea of the internet. There's relationships, there's some issues there. So, who wants to start?
Go first?
Good. So three issues. And I feel like all of us are experts at this because we are in contact with the internet every day. So I'll just share what I see, what I think, what affects me. And one of them is the aesthetic. So I feel like the internet it is also kind of culture and it reveals a type of aesthetic of concealment or obfuscation. So for example, we love to use the internet, but we don't want to see the cables around, and therefore we just have routers and we're in constant relation with something that is highly complex, but is put underground literally, or it's highly just readily accessible to us, and is connecting us through a satellite that is taking the internet to the most remote regions where we have it, but we don't want to see how the connection happens. So the aesthetic of concealment, I think is really worrisome. We have a phone and we don't even cannot know what is in it anymore. So that is pushing one of the concerns. The second, I think, would be accessibility. That we think that because we are accessing online, that first of all the access is equal. It is not. There are so many rural areas, and I think the pandemic has revealed that this is not a one-size-fits-all. It's super hard to get internet to very remote regions. In my country, Colombia, there was recently an issue where crooked politicians stole about, billions of Colombian pesos in order to bring internet to rural regions. And the fun thing is that even though that happened, it also reveals, the whole story is revealed through online, through the internet, and therefore inaccessible for those who are in the remote regions who maybe the only channel of communication is online. So that's a proof of this contradiction of access. And the third one, I think, is scale. I feel like scale, internet is growing at a rapid scale, but it's also revealing that we're losing touch of the kind of the human scale, our relationship to like what connects small communities, or how small communities can be, can have access or can see how the infrastructures that they are meant to use operate. So I think we're too quickly going in a kind of just blowing out of a scale the internet, even conceptually, when it actually, is something it's a service that you get at home and that your neighbor gets at home, and it's part of a community fabric as well.
Thank you, Felipe. Do you want to continue, Eliza?
Yeah, sure. It's, I guess, an overarching challenge for me is one of embodiment. And I think my technology doesn't help me with that. I feel even more, the more that I rely on it, the more that I sort of offload onto my phone, the less I'm actually, which is a big struggle for me anyway, that and I think especially when we talk about the climate crisis, especially when we talk about the social crisis, being in my body and aware that I'm embodied and connected to everything is, for me, the first step in sort of that repairing. And yet my relationship with my technology does not necessarily help with that. So that's kind of like my overarching kind of life issue at the moment. But specifically when I think about the work that I do as a journalist and editor, working in news media and the specific constraints around that, and at the sort of intersection with devices and technology and the internet, misinformation obviously is a huge one, and not because it is new, but just because of the scale of which it can spread. And when I'm on my WhatsApp group with my parents who are in their 70s and are highly educated, and the tosh they share with me, and I just think, oh my goodness, it's like the lack of sort of, because it is coming through trust networks, friends, like they share without any questioning, very dangerous misinformation. This was, as we saw with COVID, just extremely prevalent, right? And then the other one I was thinking about is also to do with specifically the work of journalism. Where is the room for imagining new futures? Because journalists and media tends to deal in the now. We tell you what is happening, what we see, and we can put that into context of some sort of past event, how it relates to the past, but we don't project into the future. We don't see it as our work. And so the more we repeat this kind of, these moments and our fascination and fixation with, individual events, doesn't help people create a complete picture, but the repetition of that kind of individual event gives people a sense of what the present moment is. And that's not the richest sense. It's not it doesn't help you cast yourself forward into, okay, every weather event that happens, we can say that human activity is creating it, but what do we want in terms of our future relationship to the earth and the planet? And as an industry, we just have no way of dealing with that because there's no kind of tangible evidence necessarily that we can, talk about sort of like fact-checking and being evidence-based. So that's a big challenge for us. And then the last one is really the idea around agency and empathy. How much more, you see now with the current crisis in Afghanistan, all the people who have left, and the specific moment of xenophobia, repression that we're living in, also not new. But then you see that people's sense of why we should deny help and support and solidarity is, oh, such and such has a phone. Like if this Afghan can tweet about the terribleness of their conditions, then we don't need to help them. You've got a phone. And so that sense of like what the basic material of our life is, and that the phone is actually now part of it, and no indication at all of who is worthy of support, who has agency, who's, when I started my career at The Guardian, we posted an article of people playing football somewhere in rural Uganda, and the response then was, they're playing football, their lives can't be that bad. They should be dedicating themselves to coming out of poverty instead of like playing games. And now, the phone is the equivalent of that. Like they're online. So, and I don't have an answer for that, but I really think it's fascinating, this sense of what we have, what we can say in our lives is just a part of our lives, but for other people we use it as a way of an exclusionary tool, and to say you are not worthy of our empathy because you're online or on your phone or whatever it is.
Thank you. Pia, your turn.
Thank you. Okay, so for me, the first issue, it's what I think of the hole that the internet has left. And the way I think about it is like this. Like the internet is allowing all of these creators to come together and collaborate and do things in the open source, things that are used by anyone. The internet has made it really easy for us to collaborate, to contribute with one another, to relate to one another, to collaborate at scale. But there's a huge dissonance then when it comes to funding those creators, to actually moving money from the center to the fringes, right? Because a group of, developers from Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, wherever, Pakistan, for example, they can come together, they can do open source technology that they're releasing into the world that others are using. But when it comes to actually paying them for their work, the internet falls flat, right? There is like no path for these groups to receive money to fund themselves. They need to go back to, the stack below, right? Back to the legacy system, back to incorporating, back to dealing with their own countries and their own payment processors, right? So I think that the first thing that I would say is there's this big dissonance with and the internet enabling a whole host of creators that are able to share the artifacts of their creativity with the world, but they cannot partake in the value that is generated by the product of their creativity. And the internet has still it hasn't solved this. Like, it just generated this, but then it's up to us to figure out paths. That's part of my work with Open Collective, is related to this. How do we actually fund these communities that, because we are stuck in this territorial understanding of the world, we can't fund them because they're not in the global north, or they're somewhere where payment processors just don't operate, right? And that's incredibly unfair, because that value is actually being captured by everyone in the global north, right? So that's, I guess, kind of my first challenge, or where my headspace goes to. The second one has to do with kind of another hole that the internet has, that is the identity layer, right? So the internet has open protocols for communication, for sending information, right? That is like, it's an open protocol that anyone can use. But when it comes to identity, for the protocol of who's able to participate where and what credentials do they need, there is just no open protocol. We have to rely on corporations, right? We have to rely on Facebook or Google giving us, or Apple giving us a login for us to be able to engage, to participate. So one of the biggest problems that our generation has is, what do we do with our identity? How do we validate that we have agency, or that we are part of a certain space, without relying on the big corporations that are doing this, right? And there is no one has solved this yet, right? But I think it's like one of the big problem spaces of our generation is distributed identity, like non-corporate and not national identity validation. How do we, as a global network of peers, how can we validate our identity ourselves? So for me, that's a fascinating problem, and a space that I'm actively working on. And the third one, I guess, is related. Like, one of the challenges that the internet has, it's its business model, right? The business model of the internet is awful. It's like not helpful. I remember, like, I've been an activist for many years in the democracy space, and I started my kind of activism during the Arab Spring, a little bit earlier Occupy, the Arab Spring, the movements 15M, el Yo Soy 132, the students in Chile. Like, that is where I come from, right? And at the time, for us, we were super naive. Like, Twitter was this tool, social media was this tool that everyone with access to internet was able to kind of express themselves, and they were going to have a voice, and we're going to kind of rebuild all of these things, and it was amazing, and it was, it was inspiring, but we missed the business model of the internet. We missed that what the internet kind of relies on is advertising, right? And what spreads quicker, unfortunately, is not healthy public debate. It's not, what Eliza was mentioning, it's not vetted information. Like, we are relying on tools that are created for virality, and what moves quicker, unfortunately, it's anger and just misinformation and things that make you upset. So I don't know, this is, it's almost like a mea culpa, but not really. But I think we were naive, and I think it's okay to be naive, but I also think that now we're not anymore. That generation kind of, we're adults at the moment. So I think it's up to us to kind of, think of if we are gonna be still using the internet as the network on top of which we're going to build new institutions and new systems and try to articulate new systems, until we need to have a very hard look at the business model. And that is one of the main challenges, I think, that we have.
I know we're strapped on time, but can I just piggyback on that really quickly? Because as Pia was talking, I was thinking about archiving, because I know, this idea that the internet is the great equalizer, we're all on it. And, as someone who grew up all over the African continent, I was like, yes, Africans are going to be online. And that sense of, how do we capitalize on this and who captures the value? But I'm also really anxious about, we are building on platforms that we do not own, that do not exist for the same purposes that we are creating, that are not committed to voice, participation, democracy in the same way that we are. And so once their models fail, and they own our content, and they own our stories. And so this idea of the last decade plus of people sort of putting their mark and rewriting history and being present and being seen and shaping community and identity in these spaces, that can just be lost. And that is heartbreaking and terrifying for me, because it is not supported by any archiving where actually there's a kind of a resource for the people, because actually it has been created by the people, right? But it's created by the people in a way that just allows us or very few to capture value from that. And in the present moment, while it works, it gives us a sense of being connected to each other, but not in a way that is very tenuous and thin and can easily be destroyed.
Yes, so you mentioned, a lot of issues, and I asked you to prioritize, and thank you, because it's challenging, right, to think what do this exercise of trying to see what is the most relevant, the most important. So you mentioned from aesthetics, accessibility, issues of dealing with scale, embodiment, misinformation, the fact-checking futures or utopias. What a challenge. Empathy, dissonance with collaboration, and especially with grassroots communities, the identity validation layer, and the business model. Just before jumping into the next part of the discussion, the conversation, I just wanted to highlight the importance of understanding this whole thing of the internet as part of a continuum, especially when we talk about business models, because at the end, the internet has become a mirror if we kind of enlarge the time scale of systems of extraction that were very material in the mining age, but it's just scaling like crazy now. Because they are coming together, big oil and big data extraction, they are partnering to essentially continue working on this endless grid. So I think it's important to understand that this is not something, these business models, although these issues are not because of the internet, that like a recent issue, but it is just like an amplification of systemic issues that have like deep roots, and I'm biased because there's beautiful plants on the stage. I'm thinking of branches and roots. So I have a proposal for you and for you here in the room and for everybody who's watching and who will watch in the next days, weeks, who knows, archives. YouTube as an archive, fascinating. So here's the proposal. I have it here in my notes. It's a mess. Okay, so close your eyes. Close your eyes and imagine that for some reason, we drink water and suddenly we wake up 1 billion seconds from now. I did the math, it's more or less early 2053. So imagine more or less how young or old you will be. And then here comes the hypothetical question. What if 2053, what if billions of humans during these 3 decades decided to use the internet to cultivate a shared sense of belonging to the planet, and decided to challenge the imaginary borders of nationalities, of race, gender, and other imposed identity labels that were dividing humanity in the 2020s. How would that world smell, feel, look, taste like? Eliza.
I imagine that world in some ways to look very much like the world today still does. I'm not cynical, so I didn't have a dystopian view when I was imagining. However, I did think, and maybe this is my personality or my journalism training, was that we were going to instead find other ways that the tendency to label is not a 20th or a problem of the 2020s, right? Or that we always, as we try and understand each other and find safety and keep ourselves safe, and because we have the capacity of language, we use language to label. And so I didn't imagine that the potential for the internet, and that one that has solidarity and care at its heart, is not one that we are sort of flat and labelless and don't have any, or that there are no distinctions between us. It's one in which actually we can reach out across those distinctions and find commonality. We can understand each other, right? Gender or race or nationality are blunt tools. And the reason that they're terrible tools is that we use them in exclusionary ways. But we see even with gender, for example, that people who don't fit the binary are reformulating both in terms of, language and medically sometimes, but they're giving themselves an identity. They're not rejecting identity altogether. And so in my imagining of the future, I didn't land anywhere, but I just still thought, actually, it's one in which, we are not, the value from our identity cannot be extracted, and it is allowed to change. It is porous and it is transformative, and so in some way it kind of like ebbs and flows in and out, and you don't have to be rooted in it and find safety and comfort in that identity. And how could the internet help us do that? I think that potential is very much embedded right at the start, kind of like finding your communities online. But what we've seen is that those have just been sort of like co-opted by the market and then be used to sort of distinguish one group from the other. How could you do that without I think the potential for that isn't online. I think it's in the rest of our lives. The ideas of basic incomes, taking care of our needs so that we don't have to be extractive in this way. The idea of embodiment and our connection to the rest of nature so that we don't have to see each other as threats in a kind of like zero-sum game, and there's one room for only one at the top, etc. And then you need to know, are you with us or against us kind of vibe. What about you?
Well, I think that 32 years seems like a lot of time, but also not so long. And if science fiction has taught me anything, is that it's hard to imagine like big jumps or leaps in such a small amount of years. All I can hope is that culture will be changed, because this is something that can kind of change in a rather fast, events can really alter the culture quite quickly, and you need just a couple of years to be able to kind of insert a new logic, a new language, new terms, etc. So I do think that culture then will feel and different, and I think the culture that I hope to find in those moments is one that addresses various kinds of violence that I think are present in the internet today. One of them is ecological violence, because in order to have any of your phones or the connection that we have in this room, we have to come to terms with the cost, the environmental cost on extracting, using the prime resources to be able to, put lithium batteries and so on. So I think internet is both, in that sense, the culture will have probably done something to address something else that is maybe a problem, which is it feels like internet today is biased towards remoteness. So what Roma, the idea that she wants to look anything up online, it's starting to become a lot quicker and easier, and we even want to just, we want to zoom into another reality, and we can do it these days. But then this bias towards remoteness also shrinks the world, but that shrinking is not equal. Like we just saw it with all the people who were trying to desperately escape Afghanistan, in the sense that there is still a long distance, and you need a flight, or you need to migrate and cross 2-3 countries to be able to arrive to a safer place. So I hope that by then that culture kind of works both ways. It addresses the closeness, the immediate, proximity, really. The fact that we have plants around us that are talking to one another and maybe are doing things to ourselves that we just don't know. So hopefully that culture will also address the sensorial, because I do feel today that the internet is very screen-based. And sure, we have the Internet of Things and connectivity, everything, but it's screen-based. So it's audiovisual. It really triggers the senses that are more adaptable towards the long distances. But at the same time, care, as you mentioned, touch, other bodily functions that are super important are kind of, we just don't care for them. So my question would be, what can that culture bring in this kind of short amount of years to address, how does the internet taste, for example? What is happening with all the complex electromagnetic signals in this room to my body, to the body of this plants, and address, again, that fundamental violence, which I think is like the violence of the mind, of our mind, human-centered relation to the world, where we just don't care what happens with those other beings that are here around us. I think also, that to me, culture hopefully will feel different.
Yeah, interesting. When you were mentioning the taste, I was thinking like in that kind of speculation, the taste of the internet could be less about like maybe like licking in a screen, which is like tasteless, and maybe more like imagine licking all the skin of like how many 7-9 billion people at the same time. Imagine that flavor, and I really believe that is the taste of the internet, and it's less about, when we say touching, it's maybe less about the MIT developing a technology for haptic, like touching from distance, and maybe it's more like watching a YouTube video and learn to do a massage. It's this kind of rethinking our relationship with the internet. And Pia, you had a little bit more time than the others to imagine.
So I think that maybe in 30 years, the internet is gonna allow us to be remote and present at the same time, as in like virtual reality, and us being able to, for me to be with you there in the room, even if I'm not, right? I can totally see a world where I'm sitting there, even if I'm not, my body is not there, right? But my I don't know, hologram, or my presence, or my virtual self, my avatar is embodied there. And I think we are going towards an internet that enables that. And maybe then smells will also be there and join us, right, in this kind of virtual teletransportation. I also think that I'm a fan of utopias. I think we need them. I think that if we don't have utopias, like we don't have anywhere to walk towards. And so in 30 years, yes, we're going to have, if we set our minds to it, we're going to have maybe a society that doesn't have passports, right? That doesn't have territories, that being born here or there doesn't affect how you relate to the world, how the agency that you have, right? Maybe if we do things properly, we can use the internet to create the distribution of a universal basic income to everyone, right? We will be, preventing that having a voice is an accident of birth, or that having funding is an accident of birth, right? Maybe we will use the internet to create millions of giving circles, and philanthropy is going to stop being something hierarchical and vertical and from the north to the south, but philanthropy is going to be a horizontal, shared experience where we can lend to each other, without mediation, right? Maybe it's a disintermediated world. That is a world I'm an optimist about. That's a world I would like Roma to grow into, a world that doesn't have, that identity is not provided to her by a nation state that is an artifact of the past that we've inherited and completely rules our lives, but where identity is provided by a network of peers that validate who she is. And I think that when it comes to climate change, I think that coming together as a commons, planetary commons, is like the only option for us forward. I don't think this is a challenge that governments are going to solve. I think this is a challenge that we need to solve all together as part of a planet that we share the planet with other species are coming together. And I think the internet might be able to give us the ability to collaborate at that scale without being organized by the current political institutions. So yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels good.
Yeah. Can I jump on something you said, Pia, which is that relation, I guess how I interpret it is the relationship to space, but especially the disposition of a territorial relationship. So I think the internet in this 30-some years poses a new question, which is it naturally changes our relationship to things that we, at this point, are used to think. For example, nation states. For example, the geopolitical distribution of the world. And I mean this because we're kind of the way that the world is beginning to connect relies more on like deep sea internet cables or underwater cables that connect to continents, and those become new geopolitical points of tension more than what happens between two cities inland in Europe, or a region like Luleå in the north of Sweden, where there is this, if I'm not mistaken, there is this Facebook data center. It also kind of creates a tension in the distribution of powers in Europe. So that relationship to the territorial, I think it starts to change in the level that we're used to existing in cities and spaces surrounded by fences, surrounded by walls. That's the inheritance we have from the medieval ages. But now the cities are strange because they are kind of displaced and interconnected. So that relationship to the territorial, of course, changes the relationship to the citizenship as well. The big question is how can I be here while my data is in North Sweden and my connections are distributed across the continent? So where am I accountable to? What place I am accountable to?
By data, you mean your emissions?
My emissions.
Right, you're
exactly.
localizing your emissions.
Yeah, exactly. My files, my emissions, my history. But that I think that's maybe central to this conversation, which is that relation to space.
Are you a citizen of where you are or where your data is stored? I'm just so quickly thinking about everything that you guys have said, and that actually in this imagining that Pia had of utopia, then that actually the future that we're seeing, I actually realized that the challenge, I recognize it as a challenge, it might not necessarily be, is that actually I'm sitting today in Austria, I live in the global north, and that my conception of the problem and therefore the solutions start here. Whereas actually when I think about things like people, philanthropy, the notion of it is shaped by being in the West, whereas my parents are part of what in development terms would be very sort of arrogantly called a village savings and loans association. Essentially, they were giving each other money. They had these circles that we were talking about, right? And so it makes me think that actually if we are to end up anywhere remotely different from where we are now in that 30-year span, we don't have to go far. It is not going to necessarily be technology enabled. We need to return to those ancient ideas and those people and those groups and those ways of organizing that we have seen as primitive need to actually be centralized, that those are the people who we should be deferring to, because we're not trying to make something new happen. We're basically just trying to revalue what we have for so long said is valueless, right? And that the worst kind of crime and violence would be that actually as we head backwards towards these ancient futures, as we recognize the animacy of things, as we recognize the importance of communities that exist beyond geographical or national boundaries, that the worst thing we can do is frame it as a new thought and our thought. Actually, we are simply in humility recognizing that we have strayed from ideas that have long existed, and those communities under great environmental, ecological, economic, and military pressure at the moment, and those ways of life are under threat. And as we are imagining those as part of utopias, we don't have to look far. We should protect those people in places where they're actually living in those ways now, and be humble as we adapt that into our ancient future.
I would say, picking on that, let's remember the futures. So the branch symposium will continue in 15 minutes. If you are on swap card, just change over to the next session, climate change education and the internet. And the good news is that this panel discussion is not over. Can I have the slide? And all of you can take part, because it's, we have 1 billion seconds to, can I have the slide, sorry? To continue it. So this is how we imagine intercitizenships, and this is an invitation for you to join our upcoming event where we are going to continue this conversation. I am Weekend in November in Barcelona. We have a QR code, very practical, because we are doing a call for proposals, so we're looking to hear from everyone about these same questions, these topics that we were discussing today. And until next week, this call for proposals is open, and we will be doing more things with Michelle and all these communities, because the thing is to continue this conversation. That's the mission. And I think we have 1 minute for Felipe. Thanks Pia, thanks Eliza, thanks Felipe. Fascinating conversation. We're running short of time, so Felipe, please let us know what is coming.
Yeah, so quickly, thank you so much for having us. This is wonderful, and I think the conversation is very open. So we're now going to watch a film essay that I produced in between 2018 and 2020 in the Colombian Pan-Amazon region. This is the point where the Andes meet the Amazon. Something that inspired this film, which is connected to a research called Cartographies of the Unseen, is to look precisely at how communities in remote areas are organizing themselves, but in a way, the territorial element is complex. The way that the underground, the soil, the jungle, the sky connect is also one of the issues here. But this film was mostly inspired by a previous visit to Linz, where we spoke about the materiality of the cloud. And I realized that there are many, many ways of talking about the cloud, and especially a relationship to the actual cloud. So what happens there? We have geodata, we have insane amounts of data stored for the cloud, but how does it affect the actual clouds is one. And the second was the relationship to a river, which is in this previous visit, I went to a data center that is not far from the Ars Electronica Center, and I was shown the design and how the cooling system works, and I was quite surprised that the server facility uses water from the Danube to be able to cool down its servers, but the water happens to come out 5 degrees hotter at times. So how does that affect the environment? But second, just what is the actual connector the server or the river that runs across, that provides everything that it needs. So let's watch a film. It's called Rio Arriba or Upriver. It's 14 minutes, so you can connect to the next panel right after.
Thank you.
Should we play the video?
¿Qué ven las nubes cuando nos miran desde el cielo? ¿Qué piensan al verse reflejadas en la tierra?
Como si el río fuera un espejo del cielo, a lo largo del Putumayo se encuentran muchos tipos de nubes. Hay nubes hechas de niebla, otras nubes están hechas de árboles, convertidos en humo por incendios forestales. Pero hay otras nubes hechas de política, que resultan de la guerra contra las drogas en Colombia. Nos embarcamos en un viaje a través de un gran territorio conectado por un río, el cual fluye desde las montañas andinas hasta las selvas de la Baja Amazonía. Este río es una de las serpientes más grandes que viven en el Amazonas, conectando territorios y ecosistemas vitales en peligro de exterminio. Nuestro viaje río arriba comienza a una altitud de 300 metros a nivel del mar, en el territorio ancestral de los Siona, en la frontera entre Colombia y Ecuador. En medio de la guerra contra las drogas en Colombia, la minería excesiva y el fallido proceso de paz, las naciones indígenas luchan por preservar los entornos conectados a través de este cuerpo hídrico. Durante siglos, los bancos del río Putumayo han sido el epicentro de formas extremas de violencia y la desaparición de conocimientos. Las compañías petroleras que operan en la región llegan con prácticas geopolíticas agresivas que confunden las líneas entre lo legal y lo criminal. Con el fin de mover constantemente petróleo de la fuente al mercado a través del río Putumayo, esta industria financia a los grupos armados y viola los derechos del pueblo Siona. Mientras que las compañías petroleras construyen tuberías subterráneas que cruzan el río, el pueblo Siona elabora las medicinas sagradas que dan fuerza espiritual a valientes protectores de la tierra en sus territorios y en las tierras altas. Aún hoy, las comunidades ancestrales gobiernan sus vidas con y mediante la naturaleza. El río también es una gota de petróleo, una planta de coca y una nube de herbicidas que se mueve por los cielos.
sea, es que la afectación, como les decía, de las tierras, el aire, la naturaleza, todo es por las máquinas, porque esas avionetas venían a fumigar, pero nosotros no nos gusta sembrar la coca, como decir. Entonces, pero otros vecinos por ahí, pues siempre ellos les gusta, entonces vienen a fumigar y eso todo viene a cubrir a nosotros también. Eso afecta todo el medio ambiente, toda la naturaleza, todo eso, porque uno vive de la naturaleza.
En toda la región, el cultivo de coca y los enfrentamientos entre grupos armados amenazan la estabilidad ambiental de los territorios por los que fluye el río Putumayo. Mientras que las plantas sagradas son el objetivo de las políticas de guerra contra las drogas, el olor a diésel, usado en los laboratorios improvisados para lavar las hojas de coca, se mueve suavemente a través de la selva con la brisa mañanera. Pozos de petróleo, tuberías, laboratorios de cocaína, pesticidas que caen del cielo. Como un paisaje político, el Putumayo se extiende a través de numerosas capas verticales de violencia y ocupación. El río Putumayo es también un río volador. En las regiones altas, alrededor de los 2000 metros sobre el nivel del mar, el río viaja a través de las plantas hacia el cielo y los árboles exhalan nubes. En el proceso de transpiración, los árboles liberan vapor de agua desde pequeños poros en la parte inferior de sus hojas. Este velo de niebla forma densas nubes que viajan hacia el este, ayudando a mantener los niveles de temperatura y humedad en todo el Amazonas. Y de alguna manera, este proceso natural se convierte en un mecanismo de autodefensa que asegura la supervivencia de la biosfera. Desde lo alto, las nubes se convierten en un obstáculo que esconde los bosques. Las nubes proyectan sombras irregulares en la Tierra, haciendo que algunos satélites las confundan con lagos, enormes agujeros o bosques impenetrables. Todavía hoy, no todos los satélites tienen los instrumentos necesarios para ver a través de nubes espesas, por lo que éstas se convierten en escudos naturales para el Amazonas contra esta vigilancia permanente. Es por eso que partes del Putumayo permanecen invisibles a las tecnologías que inspeccionan la tierra desde los cielos en busca de minerales, campos de coca y diversas formas de resistencia política. En el suelo, las comunidades indígenas entienden el territorio no solo como tierra, sino como un cuerpo y una red de vida que se adentra en lo profundo de la tierra y llega hasta lo alto de los cielos. Durante muchas décadas, las naciones Inga y Kamsha están luchando para reclamar sus territorios, ahora fracturados y en manos de colonos. Movidos por principios ancestrales, estas comunidades también luchan para proteger vastas áreas de bosques de niebla y selva tropical, amenazadas por proyectos mineros y agricultura insostenible. En los próximos años se construirá una hidroeléctrica en esta sección del río Putumayo, alterando el flujo del agua y vida que viaja a través de los Andes hasta la Baja Amazonía. Por esta razón, las comunidades se reúnen aquí para protestar y detener momentáneamente el flujo del tráfico, el comercio y la velocidad de la que tanto dependen las industrias extractivas. Su demanda es que nosotros reconozcamos sus formas de pensar, sentir, ver y gobernar sus territorios ancestrales. Su lucha es, una vez más, lograr la autonomía colectiva y defender los derechos de la naturaleza. A esta altitud, el río se manifiesta como densas capas de aire y vapor que se acumulan en los cielos andinos. Nuestro viaje termina a una altitud de 3.000 metros por encima del nivel del mar, en el páramo andino que rodea la laguna de la Cocha.
Desde aquí, la nación Nzinga también se redescubre como guardianes de aguas sagradas, con la guía espiritual del pueblo Siona. Aunque acá, el modelo extractivo no persigue metales, sino oxígeno. A mediados del siglo XX, se introdujo la trucha arcoíris a la laguna, liberando cientos de peces desde el aire. Hoy, grandes cultivos de trucha generan residuos que contaminan las aguas y sedimentos que poco a poco secan la laguna. Este es el lugar de nacimiento del Guamués, uno de los afluentes que desembocan en el gran río Putumayo. Desde los páramos que rodean la laguna, plantas únicas cada día absorben agua del aire y durante la noche inundan la tierra. De sus hojas caen gotas de agua que forman pantanos, arroyos, un lago y luego un río que en la oscuridad se convierte en la gran serpiente.
Así, una vez más, las nubes del Putumayo inundan el paisaje y esconden estos territorios sagrados a la mirada extranjera. Las nubes nos recuerdan que a veces no podemos saber o consumirlo todo.